The persecution of Christians is quite a hot topic these days. There have been Christian reports and parliamentary reports highlighting the terrible truth that Christians are the most persecuted group on earth today. The Roman persecuted in over 60 countries around the world. If you read reports of what's happening to Christians in North Korea, Somalia, Pakistan, Iraq, many other countries, you're horrified at the terrible atrocities that are happening against just ordinary Christians. Many of our Iranian brothers and sisters have had to flee persecution from Iran because the penalty for apostasy from Islam to Christianity under Sharia law is death. In practice, that very often means arrest, imprisonment, confiscation of property, harassment of your family, losing your job or your career prospects. And it seems like the Iranian government actually encouraged people to leave the country. But what will you do if you had to stay in a country like that as a Christian? How would you live day by day in such an oppressive environment? Some of you may have been watching SSGB on Sunday nights, a series about what would have happened if the Nazis had won the last war and invaded Britain. Can you imagine living in Nazi-occupied London like the characters in that series? Now, of course, Britain today is nothing like Iran or North Korea, and nothing like what would have happened if we'd lost the last war. But the cultural climate is becoming increasingly negative towards Christianity. Among many academics, journalists, celebrities, being a Christian is something to be ridiculed, made fun of, regarded as a sign of having a weak mind or being subject to delusions. Even though a number of academics, journalists and politicians are strong Christians. You may have seen that one Scottish MP was ridiculed just recently for having a cross of ash on her head during a parliamentary meeting. When she explained it was because it was Ash Wednesday, people just couldn't take that in. Some of you may have seen a sketch in the new Tracy Ullman show, where the comedian plays a well-qualified professional executive being interviewed for a job. She's virtually promised the end, they're all over, until the end of the interview, she happens to mention she's a Christian. The interviewers then became terribly embarrassed and eventually managed to persuade her to withdraw her application because they think she's weird. The other week, 2 Christian open-air preachers were convicted of creating a religiously aggravated public disorder because some of the crowd didn't like what they were preaching about. And of course, there are a growing number of people, including a member of our congregation, who've lost jobs, or university places, careers, or businesses for having made a stand for Christian principles. So why is this happening? People coming maybe from a Muslim world can't understand why. Isn't this supposed to be a Christian country? Well, our society was founded on Christian principles, on love for neighbour, equality for men and women, sanctity of life, the rule of law, welcoming of strangers, feeding the poor, as well as making Christ our supreme example. And our Queen still seeks to uphold those principles. And some of them David Cameron referred to as British values. But our society has suffered cultural amnesia. We've forgotten our heritage. We've rejected the living God. We've thrown out the Bible. We've marginalized Jesus Christ, on whom our calendar as well as our legal system is based. So many young people in Britain today don't even know anything about him or think he didn't exist. He's just some mythical character to some young people. Why is this? Why has this happened? Well, Romans chapter 1 gives us a rather scathing description of a society which has rejected God, which has suppressed the truth which he's revealed, and ended up in idolatry, sexual excess and perversion. So one answer to the question is that back in what we might call the rebellious 1960s, a wave of university lecturers and students rejected God and began to make skepticism and atheism mainstream. Many of those then students have been running Western culture for decades in the UK, in Europe, and in the USA. So Western culture has become skeptical, secular, and a God-free zone. The most ordinary people don't realize what's happening. What is happening is that opinion makers are following what's been called the myth of progress. The myth of progress says that mankind is constantly evolving for the better. As we evolve, we leave behind outdated notions of morality and religion, and we embrace the future, whatever it brings. So our watchword is, embrace the future, forget the past. If certain people still cling on to outmoded ideas of morality or religion, they should be ignored, marginalized, pitied, and if necessary, arrested. The myth of progress says that nothing is sacred or God-given. An unborn baby is just an appendix to its mother, so it can be removed and destroyed if she decides she doesn't want it. The myth of progress says we can reinvent marriage, says we can reinvent gender, we can change people from men to women and vice versa. We can abolish mothers and fathers and wives and husbands and make everyone and everything gender neutral. No wonder people become confused and insecure about their identity, and so lacking a solid foundation for their thinking or their living. They just accept everything the media throws at them. They become brainwashed by our God-free culture. They stop thinking for themselves about the big issues of life. They're entertained into a shallow, secular materialism. That's where we are. Some of us older ones have woken up in a strange country we don't recognize, while many of us have never known anything different. So is this myth of progress true, or is it a lie? Is there another, truer perspective? The myth of progress should have died out in the last century, after 2 world wars and 70 years of failed atheistic Soviet communism, which controlled much of Eastern Europe. Everyone should be able to see that from the history of the last century, that mankind is not getting better, that imposed atheism corrupts natural human goodness, that attempts to impose so-called progress have not brought happiness, have not brought flourishing to human beings. Progress doesn't stop human evil. It only gives evil more sophisticated ways of expressing itself. But because the myth of progress is based on the rejection of God, people can't accept that obvious truth. So they say, well, even we've made some mistakes, we still have to move forward. We have to make up the rules as we go along. Because we don't want to go back to accepting God's authority and His standards, do we? So as Christians, how do we live in this increasingly hostile culture? Do we just not think about it and just go with the flow, just follow the trends, whatever they're doing? Do we try and live our lives in 2 separate compartments? Our church life over here, our normal life over here? Or can the Bible help us to live for God in this strange, secretly hostile new world? Well, the Bible tells us that around 600 years before Jesus was born, God's chosen race, the Jewish people, were conquered and taken away from their homeland into exile in Babylon, the capital of the Babylonian Empire. There they stayed for 70 years until Cyrus, the king of Persia, conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to Jerusalem. One of the first exiles to go into Babylon was a young man called Daniel. You can read about him in the book of Daniel, which tells how he and his friends managed not just to survive, but to thrive in Babylon. They were migrants, but very gifted migrants, like many of you here who come from Iran or other countries, with so much to offer to this country. And Daniel and his friends managed to hold on to their faith in God and practice a godly lifestyle while being promoted to leadership in the Babylonian Empire. They managed to have favor with God and with the leaders of a hostile society. How did they do it? How can we do it? We could preach many sermons on this, but I just want to share with you briefly what I've learned from recently studying the book of Daniel, particularly the last 2 chapters. In Daniel 11, we read about a prophecy of future dark days for the people of God, when an evil ruler would do terrible things. This may be referring to what happened in Jerusalem under a ruler called Antiochus Epiphanes in 165 BC. It may be referring to what happened to Jerusalem when it was destroyed by the Romans in AD 70, or it may refer to some future event. But the key thing is the response of God's people. In Daniel 11 verse 32, it says, "The people who know their God will firmly resist him. Those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they may fall by the sword, or be burnt, or captured, or plundered." And then Daniel 12 verse 3 says, "Those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." I want to briefly take 3 principles from these verses. First of all, in verse 32, the people who know their God, or who are wise, will resist evil. Literally, the Hebrew says they will be strong and they'll take action. So if we're living in a hostile culture, whether it's in Babylon or Tehran or London or Barnsley, we need to be wise and we need to know God. If we're an ignorant Christian who's not walking close to God and not reading the Bible, then we'll be easily deceived by the myth of progress. We'll just assume that everything our culture says is true, and every opinion the media gives you is correct. Anyone who doesn't go with the program is just an obsolete dinosaur living in the past. And we just follow that lie. But if we're a Christian who knows God, who studies God's word, then we recognize the foolishness, the idolatry, the blindness, and the sexualization of our culture. And we'll be able to stand firm and take action. Now, the action we take will depend on our circumstances. For Daniel, his action was he continued to pray 3 times a day, even though he knew it had been made illegal to do so. His friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to bow down to this huge golden statue erected by King Nebuchadnezzar. So in Daniel 3 verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up." And Daniel, Meshach, and Abednego all suffered the consequences of their action. But God miraculously delivered them from the lion's den and the fiery furnace. And sometimes God will miraculously deliver his people. But sometimes they will have to suffer martyrdom. But I believe whatever the consequences, God will be glorified. I've often felt that people in this nation will not be convinced about Christ just by our arguments or even by good works, but maybe only when they see martyrdom and miracles. when they see Christians who are so committed to Jesus that they're prepared to suffer and die for him. When they're prepared to, when they see God doing miracles of healing in his church. So the key principle here is to be wise, to stand firm in our faith, not to compromise with a hostile culture, to take whatever action we feel is right. Second principle, in verse 33, says, those who are wise will instruct many, though for a time they will fall by the sword, or be burned, or captured, or plundered. We have to be ready to instruct or give understanding to many, even if we are mocked and persecuted. We have the true revelation of God in this book. It's often hard to understand, but we need the wisdom and inspiration of God, both to understand it for ourselves, but then to communicate it to other people. And part of our role as wise people of God is to help other people to understand the truth. Not by shouting at them, not even by preaching at them, but by so understanding the truth ourselves that we can communicate it to others with conviction. To explain to our friends and colleagues that it makes so much more sense that God created the world rather than it all happened by chance. To show the whole issue of human rights, the sanctity of life, an objective right and wrong depends on there being a God who created us in his image, who loves us and has given us moral laws to protect us and to enable us to flourish. So we need to be Christians who can think and read and understand our faith so we can explain it to other people. As I've said, there's a great library of books there which you can borrow and read, which will inspire you. I can lend you lots of other books to help you to inform your faith so you can communicate to others. And then finally, Daniel 12 verse 3 says, those who are wise will shine like the brightness of the heavens, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Here we're told that wise people will lead many other people to righteousness. Now what does that mean? Two things. By our example, we just show the fruits of a good life, just as Daniel did. The way he lived, the way God looked after him, made the rulers of the nation take note and want to follow Daniel's God. And if we stand firm in our faith and don't compromise, and yet are living lives of compassion and humility and graciousness, then people will be influenced for the good. Our office, our shop floor, our canteen may be a better place because of our example. But it can also mean bringing many to righteousness before God. Showing them how they can have their sins forgiven by the blood of Jesus shed on the cross. Because once people see through the emptiness of the myth of progress, that the emperor has no clothes, that without God life is empty and lonely and meaningless, there's a real guilt and a deep shame over what we've done wrong, then people may be ready to look afresh at Jesus Christ. The one man our society is trying desperately hard to forget or marginalize, but the one man who is the key to the meaning of life, to forgiveness of our sins and peace with God, and to the hope of a glorious new future in a new heaven and a new earth. And as Christians, we can seek to introduce our friends to Jesus so they can find freedom and purpose and peace and joy and hope in a way that nothing in the myth of progress can produce. So look again at Daniel and his example. Read the first 6 chapters of that book. Read Romans 1. And with God's help, we can live wisely in a hostile culture. We can thrive in Babylon. And if you're someone who's beginning to realise that the whole culture is currently being directed by a false myth of progress, if you want to find a firm foundation for your life, look again at Jesus Christ, the greatest, wisest, most compassionate man who ever lived, who said very bluntly, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. No one can come to Father God except by me. And even this morning, you can come to Jesus. You can be forgiven for your sins. You can have peace with God. And some of you may be ready this morning just to reach out to him and say, Jesus, if you are real, show me. If what's being said this morning is true, then please show me. Let's just spend a few moments of quietness and pray together.